Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Welcome back for another episode. Good to have you here, Bills.
Andrew, it's always good to be back recording these podcasts and bringing a whole heap of information to all of our listeners, and hopefully we translate some of the stuff that we do day in, day out as financial planners across to our listeners, and hopefully they get some value out of some of the stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And got a bit of a juicy and more technical one today that I think always gets some excitement going, because you're talking about a pretty exciting point in your life when you're talking about transitioning to retirement.
Exciting. And this is one of the shiny toys that we get to play with from a financial planning perspective when circumstances dictate. But it's definitely one of the pointier tools in our arsenal when we're talking to clients about financial planning. So we're excited to get this underway and talk to our listeners about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're talking all about a transition to retirement. So Billy, you're old, you're close to it.
Why was I waiting for that?
I already cracked this joke before we started the podcast. Billy, tell us, what is a transition to retirement?
Just a slight disclaimer for our listeners. I turned 42 about 2 weeks ago, so I've got a long time yet before I actually get into a transition to retirement phase. But when we're talking about transition to retirement, just for our listeners, we're going to refer to it, just because it's a bit of a mouthful, we're going to refer to it as a TTR. So when we say TTR, we're talking about transition to retirement. The easiest way to sort of describe it is probably just going back a little bit, Andrew, and talking about the history of how a transition to retirement strategy came about. But essentially, it was an incentive that the government had put in place to change the tax requirements and the accessibility of superannuation to encourage people to essentially stay in the workforce for longer. So what they were finding is people were reaching age 55 and turning around and saying, okay, we can access our superannuation now. That's it. We're done. We're out of the workforce. Today we're working. Tomorrow we retire and we're gone.
Which rarely happens in actuality. I mean, I think most people, it's something that you want to ease into and get into in a slow and progressive way as opposed to start and stop.
Absolutely. But what they were finding is that the skill set was leaving those particular industries. So the government wanted to offer an incentive for people to really do two things. One, retain people in the workforce for longer. I guess it's better for the economy, and data's coming out and saying it's better for our own health as well too. So keeping that skill set in the economy, keeping people contributing to society from an employment perspective for longer, but also giving the individual who's making that decision some incentives around the tax and some of the strategies that we're going to discuss later on, some incentives around staying in the workforce for longer by being able to access parts of their superannuation. So they could kind of get the best of both worlds. And it was originally designed to keep people in the workforce, maybe not full-time, but transition to a retirement, as the name suggests. So rather than going from full-time working to full-time retirement, maybe transitioning from full-time working to part-time retirement, part-time working, and keeping them in the workforce for longer with some incentives around what that looks like.
Yeah, correct. So basically offering you the ability to supplement a portion of your income that you're losing from dropping the amount of days or time that you're working, and supplementing that lost income or lost employment income from an income that comes from your superannuation. So being able to continue to maintain your existing lifestyle and income, and supplementing that sort of missed income from employment by taking a drawdown from superannuation.
So on that, Andrew, let's dig a little bit deeper and talk about in practicality. I mean, how does that work? Throughout your working life, you're adding money to your superannuation account. That's in accumulation phase.
Yep.
So there's kind of two sides to the coin when it comes to super. Throughout your working life, you're accumulating assets, so the money, or accumulating wealth. So the money that's going in is into the accumulation portion of your superannuation fund. But when you do hit a transition to retirement strategy, it then transfers across to the pension account.
Correct. So it's easy to think about this, and I encourage our listeners to think about superannuation as one asset. However, in actuality, when you're embarking on a strategy like this, you will actually have two superannuation accounts. So as Billy mentioned, there's an accumulation account, which generally speaking, you can only contribute to, but you can't draw money out of. And then there's a pension account, which you can only generally draw money out of, but you can't contribute to. So what will happen is, in order to be transitioning to retirement, you have to have both of those accounts. You have to have one account that you can contribute to because your employer needs to make contributions. If you're working or if you're self-employed, you need to have the ability to make contributions. And you need a pension account that will allow you to draw an income out of your superannuation fund.
Yep.
Can be encompassed in the same superannuation fund. It can be in separate superannuation funds, so they don't need to be all within the one umbrella. But in actuality, you basically just have two superannuation accounts when you're embarking on something like this.
Yep. So we've got money sitting in under a TTR. We've got money sitting in an accumulation account. We've got money sitting in a pension account. And when there's money sitting in a pension account, as the name suggests, it has to start paying out income in the form of a pension. So money needs to start flowing out of that. And in all reality, that's how we're supplementing the income that we were talking about before. When somebody is transitioning between full-time work to full-time retirement, they're in that phase of supplementing a bit of part-time work with a bit of part-time pension coming through from their pension account in that portion of their superannuation fund.
Correct. And I think it's also a really important point to note, because the terminology around it gets very confusing. And the amount of times that I've sat in front of a client and it's like completely lost on you. So I wish they used a different name. But when we're referring to a pension from a pension account, we're not talking about the age pension. So this has absolutely nothing to do with Centrelink, has nothing to do with the age pension entitlements, none of that stuff. It's an account-based pension. All that it is a superannuation account, and you're drawing an income from it. So yes, we're using the terminology pension, but we're not talking about the age pension. It's very important to make that distinction.
You're right. The amount of times that I have to sit there and clarify that when I'm talking to people, and we go through all of this, and then they're like, well, how's that work with the pension that I get from the government? I'm like, no, totally separate. Two different.
I wish they used a different name. I don't know. Whoever invented it used the same name for whatever reason, and I really wish.
Maybe we call it superannuation pension, and we refer to the age pension as the age pension. Maybe that's the way, or they should call it the Centrelink pension. Maybe
which is probably what it was. But we like to abbreviate things, use slangs, and use the shortest amount of words as possible in Australia, and so maybe that's what's caused this confusion.
Andrew, some of the no, you're absolutely right.
Going off on a tangent, Billy's trying to bring us back
trying to bring us back, because the thing that I wanted to pivot to next, I mean, I think it's pretty clear in terms of the attractiveness of it about being able to access your super and maybe being able to work 40 hours today, assuming that you meet all of the criteria, of course, but you're working 40 hours today and you're 100% relying on your income from your employer, to then being able to access the transition to retirement strategy, still participating in the workforce, and then drawing that money out. So working part-time and then drawing out the equivalent to make sure that your income needs are met. But one of the things that I'm really excited to pivot into is some of the tax benefits and some of the tax arbitrage opportunities that we've got with a transition to retirement strategy. Because this, from a planning perspective, this is really where we get to play with the shiny toys here, so to speak. Andrew, talk us through the tax benefits of a transition to retirement strategy. And it's obviously different depending on when you can access it and what age you are, but talk us through, give us a little bit of detail around what that looks like.
So look, just to take it one step back, because there's a bit of a distinction, and the distinction and the line in the sand. Now, there is a little bit more depending on if you're permanently retired and all of that stuff, but I'm going to assume that you're still working, right? I'm just going to put that blanket assumption in it. And I'm going to draw the line in the sand at age 60. So a transition to retirement at post age 60 and a transition to retirement pre-age 60. So there's really two main distinctions that you need to draw. Before the age of 60, so you can access a transition to retirement irrespective of your work hours. So you don't have to drop your work hours. You don't have to reduce the amount of time that you're working. If you do wish, and if it's, prudent in your financial strategy in order to do so, you can draw an income from your superannuation, provided that you've met your preservation age, which for most people is age 58. For some, it's age 57. It depends on your date of birth. So let's assume a preservation age of 58. So between the age 58 and 60, you can draw an income from your superannuation or your superannuation pension, and that income will be taxed. However, it will be taxed at your marginal rate of tax less 15%. And the reason that it's less 15% is because you already pay 15% when you contribute to super, so you're basically stripping that out. So in essence, before the age of 60, taking an income from your superannuation, there isn't a tax arbitrage opportunity, because basically you're still paying your marginal rate of tax less 15%, but you paid 15% on the way in. So you kind of cancel that 15% out, and basically there's no tax incentive by embarking on this strategy before the age of 60.
Yeah, so the opportunity here is just to take money out of superannuation.
Correct. So before age 60, you're embarking on this in order to be able to supplement an income. After age 60, that's when me and Billy get excited. After age 60, you have the ability to draw out from your pension account. And when you draw from your pension account, zero tax.
Andrew, say that again, and let's emphasize that, because I'm not sure that everybody got that. So let's just back over that again.
So after you're drawing money out from your account-based pension after the age of 60, zero tax.
So you're telling me that you can take money out of your superannuation after age 60 under a transition to retirement strategy and pay zero tax on the income that's coming out?
That's exactly what I'm telling you, Billy. You're only a couple of years away from that.
And there you have it, folks.
So that in itself, what that creates is a tax arbitrage opportunity. So if we assume an individual is over the age of 60 and still working, now let's remove the income requirements just to make this situation easy to explain.
Yep.
You can take more money out, and that's perfectly fine. There's no issues with that. But in this scenario, what we're going to maintain, or what we're going to try to maintain, is a cash flow neutral position. So basically, you're over the age of 60, you're still working. Now, situation is you haven't dropped your working hours. We're not trying to supplement any income or anything. All that we're doing is trying to take advantage of a tax opportunity that presents itself. So 59 and 364 days, 59 years old, 364 days old. As at that point in time, what you're doing is you're earning an income from your employer, you're working, and you're getting taxed at your marginal rate of tax. Now, let's just assume that that's a 42% tax rate, whatever the number is, or whatever your taxable income is. Work pays you, you get taxed 42.5% on the top element of your income, and happy days. You have the rest of the money to do whatever you see fit. You turn over the age of 60. Now what we do, and this is probably going to be a little bit difficult to try and explain over a podcast as opposed to visually, so going to need your assistance to chime in here as well, Billy. But
we need the whiteboard, Andrew.
Billy is upset, again, going on another tangent, obsessed with whiteboards. Doesn't matter whether
just makes it easier to explain.
Doesn't matter whether it's on the other side of the room, the other side of the office. If Billy doesn't have a whiteboard available, I think his hands start twitching.
I get itchy feet, that's for sure.
Sorry, bring it back on track. You turn 60 years old. Now what you do is you instruct your employer within the contribution limits, and we'll sort of get onto that as well, but you instruct your employer for a portion of your income to not actually pay you directly, but to pay towards your superannuation fund instead. So salary sacrifice is what it is. Now, take a number, right? Let's say that number is whatever, $10,000, $15,000 in a financial year, whatever the number is. You salary sacrifice additional funds to superannuation. Now, when you salary sacrifice, it goes into your super fund pre-tax. So you haven't paid your marginal rate of tax, but it will be taxed at 15% on the way into your superannuation. So you get taxed 15% to contribute additional funds towards superannuation, but you avoid your marginal rate of tax of 42%.
So it's reducing your assessable income by $10,000 that you've contributed into super.
Correct. Yep. Correct. The very next day, or at the same time as when you're salary sacrificing, what you do is you draw an income from your superannuation via that account-based pension that we were just talking about.
At 0% tax?
At 0% tax.
At 0% tax.
And so effectively what you've done is you've paid 15% tax on that money on the way in, and you've paid 0% tax on the way out. What you're left with at the end of the day is a cash flow neutral position, because you haven't lost any money by putting additional funds to super because you've drawn it straight out. And what you've essentially done is paid 15% tax as opposed to, in this scenario, a 42% tax based on that taxable income. So all of a sudden, we're talking about a year-on-year tax saving, not impacting your cash flow, and you can decide on what to do with that additional fund. You can either draw it out as additional income, you can leave that money sitting in superannuation so that it continues to grow in retirement. But effectively what you're doing is reducing your tax by not having an impact on your cash flow at all.
Yeah, well said, Andrew. And would have been easier with a whiteboard for our listeners, but I think that came across quite clearly and succinctly. One of the things that I guess we probably should have highlighted with this is originally a transition to retirement strategy was designed to supplement income with working less. We also deploy these strategies as well too for people that continue working full-time and taking more advantage or leaning into that tax arbitrage opportunity that we're talking about, which, because it's a cash flow neutral strategy, essentially what we're doing is looking at increasing the superannuation balance faster by taking advantage of that cash flow or that tax arbitrage opportunity while keeping the cash flow requirements of the individual or the cash that goes into the individual's pocket the same.
Correct. So let's just assume that same scenario that you're doing an additional $10,000 of salary sacrifice. So what that would result in is if you're salary sacrificing an additional $10,000, you're paying 15% tax and you're saving 42% tax. So you're paying $1,500 in tax. You're saving $4,200 in tax. I should have worked these numbers out beforehand because I've
you're doing a good job.
Found that I'm starting to confuse myself. So that difference, so that $2,700, yep. What Billy is saying is that additional $2,700 per year can remain in the superannuation environment so that you can continue to grow your wealth for when you do retire. And at the end of the day, your pay, your weekly income, monthly income, however frequently you get paid, remains exactly the same. So you're not impacting your cash flow, you're not impacting the amount of money that you have, and what you're doing is growing your wealth at a more rapid rate, and that additional growth comes in the form of a tax saving.
Yeah, no, well said, Andrew. Well said. So there's a bit of flexibility for our listeners. There's a bit of flexibility in the strategy to be able to adopt it for a couple of different reasons. The one that we just said is just maximizing your superannuation and putting it on a little bit of turbocharge by the time you turn age 60, or using it in the traditional sense and doing a bit of both. So being able to supplement your income while reducing your working hours as well. So from a financial planning aspect, it's a very, very powerful tool, and it's almost relevant in almost every situation that we talk to with clients who are age 60, because that tax arbitrage opportunity is too good to be able to pass up.
Yeah, it's absolutely massive. I mean, you're talking about really it's money for jam. You're not impacting your cash flow. You're not taking on additional risk. You're not really doing anything other than embarking on an arbitrage opportunity that is ultimately available to everyone or most people. There is some limits that you need to put on this. So we're talking about salary sacrificing $10,000. For some people, the ability to do so is $20,000. For some people, the ability to do so is $5,000. So you need to take into consideration your contribution limits or your concessional contribution limits towards superannuation. As a reminder, and as always, whenever we speak, receive financial advice, make sure that you're taking the right steps. But as a reminder, your employer contributions, so your normal SG contributions, the 10% that your employer is making on your behalf, is included in your concessional cap. So have seen people get caught out in the past where you think, great, this is amazing. I'm going to be salary sacrifice the full $27,500 that I can and take advantage of the upper limit in terms of super contributions and draw an income out and save a whole heap of tax. But just remember, your 10% employer contributions are encapsulated within that limit as well. So if you're earning $100,000 a year plus super and your employer is making $10,000 a year in contributions, your ability to salary sacrifice that 27.5 in concessional contributions is reduced by the amount that your employer is also making towards your super as well.
In that instance, you're capped to be able to execute on this strategy, to be able to add $17,500 in, using that example that you had before.
Exactly right. And the superannuation balance will also impact the ability to embark on this strategy as well. So if you consider a pension account, so this is a superannuation pension account. So this is the account that you're drawing an income out of. As at right now, actually not as at right now, because the limits or the minimum withdrawals have changed as a result of the COVID measures. But normally speaking, the amount that you can withdraw per annum is between 4 to 10% of the balance.
Depending on your age, yep.
Yeah, correct. And so if you've only got a superannuation balance of $10,000, for instance, or your max withdrawal is $1,000 a year, and so you still can embark on the strategy, but it's not going to be a cash flow neutral strategy. So making sure that you're within those parameters is another part of it.
So limitations on money going into superannuation, which is always there. So that could impact that tax arbitrage opportunity that we were talking about, but also on the way out. At age 60, the minimum amount in terms of what you need to take out of your super is 4%. So once again, getting the balance right in terms of the amount of money going in, the amount of money coming out, the overall balance of your superannuation account is tricky to set that up. So Andrew, I think you touched on it before. This is a very complicated strategy. So like anything that we talk about, obviously we're very, very big advocates of getting advice to make sure that you're doing it properly. There's a lot more complexity associated with this one, and it does need ongoing monitoring and management to make sure that you are working this within the confines of the superannuation legislation and the superannuation system. So yeah, just on that note, make sure that you are getting advice if you're interested in embarking on this type of strategy.
Yeah, it's really one of those strategies that anytime, I sit in front of a client and they're still working, they're over the age of 60, there's very few instances where you can't benefit from this strategy. And so you're kind of excited before you even get into the meeting with the client, because you know that there's certainly some value that you can add to improve their finances and improve their financial life as well. So it's powerful. And I've had this question before, so not saying that it's not, but it's legal. You're not defrauding the ATO. You're not doing anything that it's legal. A lot of people, when you sort of talk about an arbitrage opportunity to save
sounds dodgy.
It sounds like you're doing the wrong thing. And
we probably should have said that at the start, thinking back.
It's an incentive for people to listen till the end of the podcast.
That's it. Well, Andrew, look, I think we've managed to do it justice. And even though it's a complicated topic, I think we managed to get the key points across and explain it succinctly. I think you did an awesome job, and hopefully our listeners have got a little bit more of an understanding about some of the advantages and some of the things that are available within a transition to retirement strategy, and especially around that age 60. And before you get to that, it's crucial engaging with a financial planner to get advice. But I think we did it justice, and I think you nailed it. Well done.
Yeah, definitely. Really powerful tool. It's important to sort of even plan for it beforehand so that you make sure that you're maximizing it when the time comes to embark on it. Billy, as always, an absolute pleasure to record another podcast with you. Hope that you all got some value out of that one, and really, really looking forward to recording some more nuggets of gold.
Lovely. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you once again to our listeners for your attention, and hopefully you got a little bit out of it, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, look forward to, not seeing you, but you hearing us on the next one.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amaritis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.